is a urban planner and a real estate expert. He's been actively involved in Mongolia's property market over the past decade. We will discuss about ups and downs of Mongolia's property market and undertapped opportunities to turn the current challenges into investable opportunities in the future. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Your company M.A.D. Stands for Makes a Difference.
Make a Difference. Yeah.
Investment Solutions claim to be the pioneer of several initiations in Mongolia, such as Mongolia's first serviced apartment fund.
Correct.
And Mongolia's most comprehensive construction price index.
Yes.
Please explain these initiatives for us.
So when I first came to Mongolia, I was working for a large private sector developer in the country. And I quickly realized that if the market was to mature and improve, we had to have access to information. And so we started M.A.D. on the basis of providing information and improving the market. So we published a very large comprehensive market report that we made available freely. And then we looked at opportunities that were outside of the normal range of what developers do in Mongolia.
Which was?
So serviced apartments, for instance. There were no serviced apartments in the country. There was a strong need for it. And so we started buying up the old Russian apartments and renovating them and then renting them out to serviced apartments. So today we have 43 apartments under management. And we rent them out mostly on Airbnb. And it's working out really well. So about 70% of our bookings come from Airbnb. And so we provide a chauffeur-driven car for the airport, we provide cleaning services, we provide breakfast coupons, we do all those sorts of things. And so we like to look at opportunities that didn't exist in Mongolia before, instead of developing what everyone else does. And we are very focused on providing services to the industry rather than being a developer, basically, or being something else. Same thing with the construction price index. So we noticed that, again, for the market to mature, there had to be access to better information, which means that foreign investors coming into the market, as well as Mongolian companies, need to better understand where construction prices are, what the seasonality is, and where prices are moving.
Is it accessible online?
At the moment, it's owned by the Ministry of Construction, so we did it for a private company, but for the Ministry of Construction, and they will make it available online.
I see.
But sections of it are available online, but our real estate market data is available online, and a lot of our databases are reflected in that. So the construction price index is summarized within that document.
I see. So whoever is interested to find out about those index and the figures and numbers can just access your
yes,
website,
correct.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Your intelligence unit made a very compelling analysis and projections on the rise in demand and shortage in supply of parking spaces in Ulaanbaatar over the next few years. As a result, you again started another initiative called UB Parking Fund, which could be seen to me as an impact investment initiative.
Correct.
How is this project progressing?
So we've raised the first tranche of capital and we've bought a bunch of parking spaces in UB. Parking in UB is actually a very simple investment for me because there's so many cars here, there's such a lack of parking in the city. The city is restricting more and more the parking spaces, they're starting to charge parking spaces. And you can see now public spaces have been closed off so that parking is you now need to pay for it and so on. So we thought that the parking spaces within buildings, so we buy parking space within existing buildings, will come up at a premium. As you try to remove the supply of parking spaces on the streets and as people get more and more cars, our rationale is that the parking space within buildings will increase in value and therefore the demand for them will increase, and so that's what we're doing.
So,
and parking is also a very simple investment to manage, unlike other forms of real estate, because there's no maintenance, there's no utility bills, it's very, very straightforward.
Right. So please help me understand a bit more on how it's working. You said you bought some parking spaces in Ulaanbaatar.
Yeah.
Could you name some of them? And they're all under existing buildings?
Yes. So we look at existing buildings. They're all around here, actually. They're all around the State Department Store and the Sukhbatar Square. And so typically we'll buy 2 or 3 parking spaces in a building. We go in the building, we try to find people who are selling parking spaces. And if it falls within the price criteria, then we buy them off. And often the people who we buy them from are the people who end up being the tenants for those parking spaces.
And after that, what happens?
After that, so now probably in summer we're going to raise a second tranche of capital. And if successful, then maybe a third tranche will be about building parking spaces. So we have a vision towards building integrated above ground parking structures, which is severely lacking in UB. But this is, of course, is a much bigger project.
Yeah.
So before we get to that, we want to build some experience, we want to build some track records of knowing exactly where the price points are, of what the demand is and how it works. And we need to prove to our investors that there is a market. And so raising small amounts of money bit by bit allows us to do this while maintaining the revenues that we need in order to build on phase 3, to build one parking spot. And if it works, then we maybe build multiple.
I see. So for the investors who are investing in this fund, what is their turnover like? How long does it take?
So the yields at the moment is about 15%. So there's a net yield annually yield that investors getting. It's a private fund. It was in many respects crowdfunded. So it was done through a website, and so people subscribed on the website. And so investors get a 15% yield at the moment. We are keeping some of the revenue to be able to reinvest back into purchasing more parking spaces because we want to drive up the capital value of the portfolio.
Do you see more foreigners investing in that fund or more domestic?
No, definitely foreigners. Definitely foreigners. Domestically, we haven't seen much interest.
Or do you think it's a lack of awareness? Or
no, I think for domestic investors, it's easy enough for them to do it themselves. If they want to buy 5 parking spaces, they can do so without our management costs and our management fees and so on. We present value because we aggregate everything together, and so we have efficiencies because we buy so much. But for a domestic investor who has $50,000 to invest, he can buy 2 parking spaces quite easily by himself. He doesn't need us to do it, and he can find a tenant very easily.
I think it's very smart that you changed your model a bit because of the economic issues in Mongolia. Instead of trying to rent out apartments, which are of course much costly to most of the people, you've turned into parking spaces, which are maybe much more essential than the luxury apartment.
I know many Mongolians who buy a car before they buy an apartment.
Did you find it interesting?
Yeah, for me it's very interesting because in Europe it's completely the opposite. For me, I don't have a car, and I will only buy a car if I really need one. But my preference is always not to buy a car. If I can walk or cycle or take taxis, that's what I always do.
Yeah, but then again, if you look at the other side, public transportation is not really as great as Europe, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. But even in UB, I don't have a car. I walk everywhere. But
great.
people
You must have a very good located apartment then.
I live upstairs.
Oh, okay, good for you.
So for me, it's very easy. But I think the Mongolian mentality also, this is a transition from the horse to the car. And for many young Mongolians, having a car is a status symbol. It's a sign of wealth, which is why I know a number of Mongolians who live with their parents, often in the living room, but they will buy a $50,000 car before they buy an apartment. You can buy an apartment for $50,000, but they will buy a car instead. Because it's a status symbol, it's something they're proud of. And of course, you have the winter conditions, you have public transport, you have also the realities of living here. But we feel that there's an oversupply of apartments in the market, but no one is building parking garages. So it's a simple supply and demand game. Or very few buildings, And there's always undersupplied. There's always 30 spaces for 60 apartments.
You're an urban planner as well. Besides the above ground parking lots, do you think we do have the potential of building underground parking lots as well? Yeah,
you do. The problem is that it's a lot more expensive. But actually UB has a lot of very good public spaces. So you have the courtyards, so behind here in the 40Ks you have a lot of the courtyards. You have Sugbatar Square, you have a lot of big open spaces where you can build underground parking garages and leave the space on top, so you can just rebuild the square on top of it. So it doesn't change anything. So imagine if Sugbatar Square was 3 levels of parking undergrounded. It'd be very convenient, be very easy, and you wouldn't change Sugbatar Square. It would be exactly the same. And this is what you've seen all over the world taking place. So Chicago, there's a Millennium Park. All over the world, parks and public spaces have been transformed into underground car parks. And so it will happen in UB. It's a question of time.
Have you mentioned this idea to anyone from the ministry, for example?
Yes,
you seem to have very close connection.
we talk often with the ministry and municipality. The problem is there's many agencies in Mongolia who deal with those sorts of things. So, you know, from the chief architect's office to the MUB to the master planning department to the urban design institute. And so getting everyone together, getting everyone in agreement. And then there's a symbolic nature of a private parking space underneath a public space like Sugbatar Square. Then the security concerns being so close to Parliament and so on. So there's hurdles, but they can be breached. You know, they can be resolved. There's not a problem. The problem is finding someone who has the money and the resolve to make it happen. But we're working with one developer at the moment who actually does want to, interestingly, to build the car parking spaces to the south of Sugbatar Square and then connect it directly to Central Tower, to Blue Sky Tower and to the municipality through underground tunnels. Amazing. Which means people could drive underneath it and link directly into their office spaces without going outside.
So that project is in discussion, is it?
At the moment, yes. So we are doing documentation, preparation. We're looking at various investors to see if we can make it happen.
I really hope it will happen.
So do I.
Yeah, and all the best in that indeed.
Thank you.
Another greater impact investing opportunities lies in the suburban or GER districts of Alamaty, I believe. Those who are not so familiar with UB GER districts, they're basically districts where people live in Mongolian traditional housing, GERs, or yurts, and burn coals to cook and keep themselves warm. So it's not as exotic as it might sound, you know, GER district, yurt district. Because such GER districts are the main source of air pollution in Ulaanbaatar, unfortunately. But countries like the Philippines and India have solved some of their housing problems with impact investment and built large-scale, low-cost housing for their suburban population. As an expert, do you see opportunities for such project happening in UB to rebuild the suburbs? Yes,
there are many opportunities, but the challenges are huge. And UB is a very unique situation compared to the Philippines and so on. First of all, the coal is not so much the issue. The one issue is the land rights. So UB is maybe one of the only capital where the poorest people of the city are the landowners. In every other capital city in the world, or just about, it's the richest people who are the landowners, and the poorest people are squatters. They have no land rights, no land tenure. In UB, actually, everyone in GER districts has a land right. So they have rights of possessions, of ownership, or they have a freehold right to the land. And every Mongolian, as you know, has a free right to land as a birthright. True. Which means the GER districts are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, because of this, you have very low density. So if you look at the low-income areas of Mumbai, of Manila, of Chinese cities and so on, they're very dense. Lots of people sleeping on top of each other and living on top of each other, right? UB is extremely spread out, very low density, which means it's impossible to provide urban infrastructure to those people. You can't provide the buses, the heating, the water, the electricity and so on to such a low density for people who can't afford it, because the cost of doing so is huge. You can provide this infrastructure in a US suburban setting where the average home pays $15,000 a year in taxes. You can't do it in UB where people pay no taxes. So the cost of building that infrastructure would be in the billions of dollars, and the city just can't do it. And it's not just the physical infrastructure, it's also the schools, the hospitals, the buses, all those sorts of things. It's too expensive to do. So the solution is to densify. You need to bring people closer together, and then it's affordable to build infrastructure for those sub-centers. In terms of providing affordable housing, so I work on ADB and World Bank projects in the GER districts. And there's two projects in particular that I'm working on at the moment for the ADB. One is a GER area development investment program that invests in infrastructure in the sub-centers of UB. So we're working on two sub-centers at the moment called Bain Hosho and Selb. And the other one is an affordable housing and urban renewal project, which will build human-centric affordable housing for residents of the GER districts. What do you mean by human-centric? So a lot of the affordable housing projects that have happened so far by GADEB, by GAP, by all of the state agencies, they build single-use high-rise towers, right? And this is a model that has been proven the world over not to work from a social perspective. People lose touch with their identity. You have a rise of vandalism and so on. What works is something that's called human-centric. So it's human-focused development. It's about scale. So instead of building high-rise towers with lots of emptiness around it. What we're trying to do is build mid-rise townhouses. Okay. So people still have an attachment to land, they still have a garden, they still have low-rise cities. And so you have... That's right. And you create communities and you create meeting spaces, you create green spaces and so on. So it's creating more of a village feel rather than a megapolis feel. Is it in the
stage of conceptualization? Or
no, so we're finishing the feasibility study of the affordable housing in March, April. Mm-hmm. And then it will go to the Parliament to be discussed. And hopefully we can start construction in 2018. Okay. It will depend. Once we've finished our mission, then it depends on the Mongolian Parliament and the ADB to push it through. Right. Which can be very quick. It can also take a long time.
Yeah. Well, I hope the Mongolian Parliament will be, looking into those kind of innovative solutions. Otherwise, the people have been quite angry and upset with all the social and the environmental problems arising from all.
And it's understandable. It's a very difficult choice. I work a lot in the Go districts, mm-hmm. and people there realize that burning coal is bad for their families, bad for everyone, but they have no choice. They need to heat themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's a very difficult situation.
But as someone who's lived in Mongolia for a decade, and also have been involved in different sectors, different economic sectors of the country, which kind of opportunities do you see in the countryside in terms of building up more business-like environment there, and at the same time helping their sustainable livelihood? Yeah,
so the two big, of course, are agriculture and tourism. Mongolia is extraordinarily beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. The problem is how it markets itself. It's too expensive for low-income tourists, mm-hmm. and it's too difficult, and you don't have the infrastructure for the high-income tourists. So if you look at African countries that also have sort of beautiful nature and so on, they've marketed themselves on very high income tourism, so Tanzania, Kenya and so on, with extremely good luxury tented camps, the whole glamping movement and so on. And I think Mongolia needs to go into that direction. But in order to be able to do so, it needs to build infrastructure. A tourist who pays $2,000 a day is not going to sit in a minivan going over bumpy roads for 5 hours a day. And so there needs to be an infrastructure built on that. But there also is a huge market for the nomads who start welcoming tourists into their lifestyles and so on. And this is sort of destination tourism, is a huge opportunity that is not being exploited at the moment. And which I think, there's a few small companies that are trying to do it. And I think the Ministry of Tourism needs to do a better job of supporting those sorts of initiatives. And then agricultural business. I think the opportunity actually lies in letting Korean and Japanese companies come and do agricultural projects in Mongolia. There's a common misconception in Mongolia that if you do long-term leasing of land or even selling of land to Japanese or Korean or Chinese companies, that means you're losing that land. And I think that's nonsense, because that land is still in Mongolia. Exactly. They can't take it away back to Japan or Korea, and the Mongolian government is here to regulate. So you can tax it, you can derive revenues from it, you can do all sorts of things. But this is something that, the Japanese, they really need grazing lands. So do the Koreans, because they have overpopulation, they have issues there. And it will come at no cost to Mongolia, and it will create jobs, it will create benefits, but importantly, it will create skill transfers, because they will employ Mongolians on their farms, that those Mongolians will then go and set up their own farms and become competitors. And
however, do you see the relatively lengthy cold season in Mongolia a problem in doing such kind of agricultural projects?
It used to be, no longer. Now that you have hydroponic agriculture, you have so many new types of innovative agriculture that you can do, it's becoming less and less of a problem. And bear in mind that during the Soviet period, Mongolia was a net exporter of wheat to the Soviet Union. Mongolia during the Soviet Union was far bigger agriculturally than it is today. Exactly. Today we have 20% of the agriculture we had at that time. Now the Soviet Union agriculture wasn't particularly sustainable or wasn't particularly good quality, but there is a market for doing this. And bear in mind that the world over, people associate Mongolia with the steppes. If you ask anyone in the world, what is Mongolia? They imagine the steppes. And you have restaurants the world over that sell Mongolian beef. That's not actually Mongolian, it's from Inner Mongolia. But there is a perception of good quality beef. And I think there's a niche market for Mongolia to go into very high quality beef, like Wagyu beef or Kobe beef or something like that, that can then be sold within Asia to Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Singaporeans and so on, because the branding is already there. Now it's just a case of creating the product. And there's a number of opportunities like this that I think Mongolia could actually do fairly easily.
Besides your real estate business, have you been involved or have you had deeper research on this kind of economic opportunities you just mentioned besides your real estate?
No, I mean, we really focus on the real estate. Everything else often comes as a result of the real estate. Because if you're looking at the urban areas, you also need to look at what drives them economically and how the economy as a whole functions. So I'm very interested in the macro elements. And we have advised sort of different agencies on the opportunities in Mongolia. The problem is not so much the opportunity here, the problem is the size of the markets and the regulatory environment. Those are the two big issues that investors face. So the opportunities are there, and there are good Mongolians on the ground that can actually make them happen. The problem is simply the government often gets in the way. And it's very difficult to deal with Mongolian government for such a small market. There are other countries where the government is equally difficult to deal with. And China is notoriously very difficult to deal with, but at least the market is much bigger. Mongolia is a very limited market. It's 3 million people, of which only 1.5 live in the city, of which how many can actually afford any kind of product.
Due to exactly the reason you just said about the relatively small size, not relatively small size of the market, however, relatively big landmass. Do you think Mongolia has more opportunities for becoming springboard to other countries like, I don't know, China or Japan and Korea, you just mentioned, instead of trying to attract investors who would do business targeted for Mongolians? So
I think actually Mongolia being such a large landmass in an area, geographic area that has so many high density countries and so many countries that are growing in terms of economy, presents enormous opportunities. And Mongolia, rightly or wrongly, I mean, there's debates on both sides, is very much against letting foreigners in for a number of reasons. Of course, the Chinese, there's a fear of being invaded and becoming a Chinese country of sorts. And those fears are, of course, founded. But I think there's a middle ground that can be found between the current xenophobia of we're afraid of foreigners, so we'll make life very difficult, to actually benefiting from the potential and investment that it brings. The landmass that you have here is an enormous godsend that Mongolia has. And it is beyond the mining, I think it is what's going to prove the fortune of Mongolia over the long term. Of course, there's huge mining opportunities in the country. But the landmass is also a big issue because it means everything is difficult and everything is far. You know, UB is a city-state, in effect. But if you want to go anywhere else, if you want to create any kind of business to secondary cities, it's just so far, it's extremely hard to do. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions on your personal journey.
Yeah. Back in 2012, in your interview for a local newspaper, UB Post, I believe. It's exciting, fun, and the best possible business school in the world.
Yes.
I love the positivity, but can you still say so after 5 years?
It still is the best business school in the world because we've seen both the good times and the very bad times. And so it's forced, for example, for my business, it's forced us to completely change and adapt and be flexible. And so the business lessons you learn in Mongolia are very concrete. They're very good. And they're probably much more down to earth than the experiences you will have in any other country. The things I've learned in Mongolia is the power of relationships. And the power of being practical and being very pragmatic about what you do, and always looking at what can go wrong.
So it's type of scenario planning you have to plan.
Absolutely.
Scenarios.
Absolutely.
What if this happens? What if that happens? And I think that sounds like a very good lesson for you.
Yeah,
right?
But at the same time, Mongolia is actually quite unique in the fact that it's relatively easy to start any venture. If I was working in the UK or in most Asian countries, it'd be very difficult for us to do new product lines, new markets and so on, because there'd be so much regulation, there'd be so much red tape, and it's such a competitive industry. Here, if we have an idea, we can start on this idea next week and see if it works at relatively low cost. And if it doesn't work, we can shelve it and we can try something else. And Mongolia is quite unique in this. And that's why you have such an entrepreneurial culture. Mongolia, for me, I've traveled all over Asia, is very unique in how many entrepreneurs it has. Mongolians are by nature extremely entrepreneurial, which is a problem as well as a negative. It's a problem for people like me because when we have good employees, they stay with us 1 year and 2 years and then they want to go and compete. And the dream of every Mongolian is to have their own business, I think, or that's how I see it.
Partly true, I think.
Yeah, and whereas if you go to China, if you go to Japan, if you go to Korea, the dream for them is to work for a company for the rest of their lives and to be a salaryman, right? And so Mongolians have this great entrepreneurial spirit where they want to try everything, they want to do everything and so on.
What else do you think the government should do in the next few years? Because they just formed about half a year ago, and they're, I think, really trying hard to lift the economy up. How much do you think they will be able to accomplish it over the next few years?
Yeah, so the biggest problem with the government is, it's a vicious circle. It's a very difficult situation they're in because what investors want is stability. The best way to prove stability is over time. You can't prove stability over 6 months. So we'll see in a year or two if the government is stable. The key thing for the current government is to maintain its promises and to stay on message. One of the key challenges from the previous government was that there were so many conflicting messages. So constantly there were ministers and members of parliament and so on that were saying certain things in the press and they were all fighting amongst each other and so on. There was no unity in the government. Today with MPP controlling the parliament, controlling the municipality and probably soon controlling the presidency, they will have all the tools necessary to have stability and to have a single message. And I think that's what's very important is for whatever happens. I mean, for example, today there's a lot of uncertainty about will Mongolia be able to meet its March payment on the Chinggis bond? Will the IMF come in and so on? And even on the March payment, the Minister of Finance is saying one thing, the Prime Minister is saying another thing and so on. So we need to have clarity in what is going on. And in most other countries, you have a clear chain of command. And so you have a spokesperson from the government who says what the government position is. Other ministers and parliament members are not really allowed to talk publicly about affairs of state. And I think this is something that needs to be slightly improved in Mongolia. I'm actually quite impressed so far with the current government. They've inherited from a very, very difficult situation. It hasn't crashed yet, which is already, it's a positive, it's a good sign because we were heading towards a massive crash. And they're trying their best to improve the situation while maintaining the political promises, which is not always so straightforward. So we'll see if they're able to do it. I'm confident. I'm confident.
When you said 5 years ago that you came to Mongolia to build a career, do you think you've already achieved that goal? And what are your mid and long-term goals in your business life, and how are they related to Mongolia?
I think I've learned an enormous amount, not just from a business perspective, but mostly from a market perspective. So we've become valuers, we've become planners, we've become market research specialists, and we realized there that we have products which actually from an Asian market perspective are quite unique and very good. Our capacity to integrate together the investment side, the research side, the urban planning and evaluation all together into one core team is something that's quite unique here. So we think there's a market for this in other Central Asian countries as well as sort of Northern Asia. And so what we want to do is expand the company elsewhere. Mongolia is a relatively small market, as I've mentioned before, and so for us to keep growing, I think we have to grow outside of Mongolia. So we'll retain our base.
So you want to duplicate your business model in Mongolia and implement it elsewhere? Okay.
Yeah, we'll retain our base in Mongolia, but I think there's a number of Central Asian countries in particular that have gone through the same transition than Mongolia and have the same problems that we can probably enter in and provide some good services. And it is those countries where the big companies don't want to go into because they're too complicated, because they're too expensive and they're too small of a market, that where we have a competitive advantage to be able to take our lessons from Mongolia and go and apply it in other countries.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good plan.
We'll see if it happens, yeah.
Which countries are you looking at the moment, or it's still in your midterm plan?
So it's still midterm, but we're looking sort of at Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, those sorts of Central Asian countries.
I see. Okay, Chris, very extremely interesting discussion. I thank you very much, and I
Pleasure.
just want to briefly explain about the project
Yeah.
again to let the viewers and yourself as well. So this project, Doing Business in Mongolia, is a content strategy project which will produce 4 main outcomes: an ebook, business guidebook, that will be mostly based on the kind of discussions we're having with these 12 business leaders we've chosen, and also of course this YouTube videos, original video series. We're also going to launch a website on this project, Doing Business in Mongolia, so people can visit there anytime, even after the videos and the ebook, of course. And we're also planning to implement or organize a forum in the summer when the sun is up and the weather is warmer, for anyone who's interested in exploring more business opportunities in Mongolia. If you are in Mongolia, please join us
I'd love to.
there in the forum. And I would also like to encourage my viewers to sign up in the link under the description in this video to receive the free copy of the business guidebook we're providing. And we hope that you will be able to share some of the market insights with us, so that we could include some of that in the book.
Happy to.
Okay, thank you
very
much.
Thank you.